Now, Prince George has joined Prince William to prepare a meal for the homeless at the same shelter Princess Diana brought the future king to as a child.
What Prince William just confirmed about George's future has royal insiders in absolute shock. Senior palace staff are calling it unthinkable. Historians warn it could destroy the monarchy. But William doesn't care. After years of hiding the truth, the palace finally revealed what's really happening behind closed doors. And when you hear what they're doing to Prince George, you won't believe your ears. This isn't just breaking tradition, this is burning it to the ground. The announcement dropped 1 minute ago, and the palace can never take it back.
Everything is about the future, and about if you don't start the children off now with a happy, healthy, stable home.
The morning of December the 10th, 2025 began like any other day for most people in Britain, but by mid-morning, a brief statement from Kensington Palace had set off a chain reaction that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. At exactly 9:30, the palace released an announcement that had been carefully guarded by only a small inner circle of advisors and family members. The statement was short, direct, and remarkably free of the usual diplomatic language that tends to cushion controversial royal decisions. It confirmed what had been whispered about in private conversations among those close to the family for months. A major decision had been made about how Prince George, the future king, would be raised and prepared for his eventual role. This was not simply an update about which school George would attend or when he might start taking on more public appearances. This was something far more significant. The palace was announcing a fundamental shift in approach, one that would affect nearly every aspect of George's childhood and teenage years. For anyone familiar with how royal heirs have traditionally been raised, the implications were immediately clear. This represented the most dramatic departure from established protocol that the British monarchy had seen in modern times. The timing of the announcement caught many people off guard. Just 3 weeks earlier, Prince William had sat down for a rare interview, where he spoke with unusual candor about the challenges of royal life. He had talked about the importance of protecting his children's childhood and giving them experiences that he and his brother Harry had missed out on. At the time, most observers interpreted his comments as the kind of general statements that any parent in the public eye might make. Nobody realized that William was actually laying the groundwork for a decision that had already been finalized. He was preparing the public, in his own subtle way, for news that would challenge centuries of tradition. Inside the palace walls, the reaction to the announcement was swift and divided. Senior courtiers, many of whom had dedicated their entire careers to maintaining royal traditions and protocols, were reportedly taken by surprise. Several sources later described an atmosphere of uncertainty and concern among the older generation of palace staff. These were individuals who understood the monarchy through the lens of history and precedent. They had spent years, sometimes decades, learning the proper ways things should be done. Suddenly they were being told that much of what they knew was being set aside. For some, this felt like a rejection of everything they had worked to preserve. One former private secretary, speaking privately to journalists, described the mood in certain quarters as something close to panic, though carefully concealed beneath the usual professional composure. However, among the younger members of the palace staff, particularly those who had been personally hired by William and Catherine, the response was markedly different. These team members had witnessed firsthand how protective the Prince and Princess of Wales were of their children. They had seen William and Catherine make decisions over the years that quietly pushed back against traditional expectations. For this group, the announcement was not shocking at all. Instead, it felt like the natural conclusion of a process that had been unfolding gradually since George was born. They had watched the couple consult with child psychologists, read extensively about child development, and have serious conversations about what kind of upbringing would best serve their son. The British media responded with the intensity you would expect for a story of this magnitude. Within hours, every major newspaper had published multiple articles attempting to analyse every word of the palace statement. News websites crashed briefly from the surge in traffic. Television networks interrupted their regular programming to bring viewers special coverage, with royal correspondents scrambling to contact their sources and provide context. Many journalists who had spent years cultivating relationships with palace insiders found themselves frustrated. Despite all their connections, this decision had been kept remarkably quiet until the moment of its official announcement. The level of secrecy surrounding the deliberations was unusual, even by royal standards. So what exactly had the palace confirmed? The statement contained several specific elements, each significant on its own, but together representing a complete reimagining of how a future monarch would be prepared for the throne. The first major point concerned George's education. The palace confirmed that Prince George would not follow the traditional path of attending boarding school. This alone was extraordinary news. For generations, male heirs to the British throne have been sent away to boarding school, often at a young age. The practice has been seen as essential for building independence and resilience. Prince Charles famously attended Gordonstoun in Scotland, an experience he later described as deeply unhappy. Prince William went to Eton, which proved to be a better fit for him, but still meant spending most of the year away from his family during crucial years of his development. George, according to the palace, will remain a day student throughout his entire education. He will attend school, most likely continuing at Lambrook School, where he currently studies, but he will come home to his parents every single evening. The statement emphasised that this decision was made to ensure George maintains strong family bonds and receives consistent parental guidance during his formative years. The palace made a point of noting that this approach would not compromise the quality of his education, but rather enhance it by providing stability and emotional security. The second major element of the announcement dealt with George's public duties. The palace stated clearly that Prince George will not undertake any solo public engagements until he reaches the age of 18. He will still appear alongside his family at major national events like Trooping the Colour, Christmas services at Sandringham, and other significant occasions. But he will not be sent out to represent the monarchy on his own while he is still a minor. This represents a dramatic reduction in public exposure compared to what previous generations experienced. Prince William was conducting his first solo engagement at 15. Prince Charles was even younger when he began taking on official duties independently. The pressure on these young royals to perform flawlessly in front of cameras and crowds was immense. And according to experts who have studied the psychological impact of such early public exposure, often caused lasting damage. The palace statement acknowledged this history, though in carefully chosen language. It noted that the decision was made with Prince George's mental health and well-being as a primary consideration. The statement recognised that childhood and adolescence are critical periods for personal development that should not be overshadowed by the weight of public duty. The monarchy, it suggested, was strong enough and secure enough to wait until George was genuinely ready to serve in a public capacity. The third component of the announcement might seem minor to outside observers, but actually carries deep significance. The palace confirmed that in school and in private settings, George would be known simply as George Wales, not as His Royal Highness Prince George. This decision was explained as an effort to give George as normal a childhood as possible and to allow him to form genuine friendships based on who he is as a person rather than his future position. This represents a profound shift in thinking about royal identity. For centuries, royal children have been raised with a constant awareness of their difference from others. They have been addressed with formal titles from birth, reminded regularly of their special status and future responsibilities. William and Catherine are essentially saying they want George to understand his destiny without having his entire childhood identity consumed by it. The fourth major point addressed privacy and media access. The palace made it unequivocally clear that there would be no authorised photo shoots or interviews with Prince George until he reaches adulthood and can make informed decisions about his own public image. The only photographs of George that would be released to the public would be those taken by his mother, Catherine, on significant birthdays and special occasions. The media would be expected to respect this boundary, with the clear implication that legal action would follow for those who did not comply. This was William drawing a firm line based on his own traumatic experiences with media intrusion during his childhood and the devastating loss of his mother, Princess Diana. He was using his position to protect his son from the relentless scrutiny that had defined his own early years. Finally, the palace confirmed something that revealed perhaps the most about William and Catherine's thinking. Prince George would receive regular private briefings about his future role and constitutional position, but these briefings would be age, appropriate and delivered by his parents rather than by courtiers or official advisors. William and Catherine were taking direct personal control of how and when their son learned about his destiny. They would be the ones to explain the weight of the crown, the responsibilities that lay ahead, and the expectations that would eventually fall upon him. And they would do so gradually, carefully, in a manner that allowed George to process and understand rather than simply be told and expected to accept without question. The palace statement concluded with a paragraph that many observers identified as the key to understanding the entire decision. It expressed the Prince and Princess of Wales's belief that a strong foundation in childhood, built on family stability, quality education, and personal well-being, would better prepare Prince George for his future service to the nation than any amount of early public exposure or rigid adherence to outdated protocol. There it was, stated plainly. The explicit rejection of tradition in favour of what contemporary child development research actually suggests produces healthy, capable adults. The monarchy was evolving, and Prince George was going to be raised according to modern understanding of child psychology rather than centuries-old custom that had never been seriously questioned until now. This decision did not emerge from lengthy committee meetings or constitutional consultations with government officials. It came directly and personally from Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, and it reflected years of their own painful experiences, careful observation, and determined planning. To truly understand why the palace confirmed this radical departure from centuries of tradition, you need to understand what shaped William and Catherine's thinking about both parenthood and the monarchy itself. Prince William's childhood was marked by stark contradictions that would leave lasting impressions on him. He was simultaneously privileged beyond what most people could imagine and traumatized in ways that would affect him for the rest of his life. He lost his mother at the age of 15 under circumstances that involved media pursuit and public spectacle on an unimaginable scale. He watched his father struggle with the constant tension between the demands of royal duty and the desire for personal happiness. He attended prestigious schools where he was both protected by security and exposed to treatment that differed from other students simply because of his birth. Throughout all of this, he was told repeatedly, sometimes directly and sometimes implicitly, that his feelings, his preferences, and his individual needs were secondary to his future role as king. In numerous private conversations over the years, William has spoken with people close to him about the profound sense of powerlessness he felt as a child. Decisions were made for him by adults who rarely asked what he wanted or how he felt, where he would go to school, when he would appear in public, how he would spend his holidays. Even small daily decisions were often determined by protocol or by what courtiers deemed appropriate for a future king. Even well-meaning family members and palace staff seemed unable to see him as a child first and a future monarch second. Everything in his life was filtered through the lens of his eventual destiny, and his actual present, the childhood he was living in real time, was often sacrificed for a future that seemed impossibly distant and yet suffocatingly inevitable. Catherine came to the royal family as an outsider, which gave her a perspective that William, having been born into the institution, sometimes lacked. She had grown up in a close and supportive family where children were encouraged to express themselves freely, make mistakes without fear of harsh judgment, and develop at their own natural pace. Her parents, Carol and Michael Middleton, were successful in business, but they were not obsessed with social status or maintaining rigid traditions. They were focused primarily on their children's happiness and overall well-being. When Catherine entered royal life and began to understand how things operated within the palace system, she saw just how fundamentally different that approach was from how royals had typically been raised for generations. During their courtship and in the early years of their marriage, William and Catherine had extensive, serious conversations about what kind of parents they wanted to be. These were not casual chats over dinner, but deep and sometimes difficult discussions about how to balance the unavoidable demands of royal duty with creating a genuine family life. William would tell Catherine stories from his childhood, some amusing, many deeply sad, and she would ask him pointed, thoughtful questions. Did that make you happy? Did that actually help you in any way? Looking back now as an adult, would you choose that same path for our children? These questions forced William to confront uncomfortable truths about his own upbringing. The birth of Prince George in July 2013 transformed these abstract discussions into concrete reality that demanded immediate decisions. Suddenly they had a son who would one day be king, and every choice they made about his upbringing would be scrutinized by the media, potentially challenged by palace officials, and measured against centuries of precedent. The institution had very fixed ideas about how royal heirs should be raised, ideas that had been refined and reinforced over generations. But William and Catherine were determined not to simply defer to tradition just because it was tradition. They wanted to be real parents to their children, not just royal parents performing a duty. In the early years of George's life, they made choices that seemed small at the time, but actually signaled their deeper intentions. They insisted on hiring their own staff rather than accepting the palace's recommendations of long-serving household employees. They chose where to live based on what would give their children the most normal life possible, not what would be most convenient for carrying out official duties. They moved first to Anglesey in Wales, then to an apartment at Kensington Palace, and eventually to Adelaide Cottage in Windsor. Each move was calculated to provide their children with more privacy and a greater sense of normalcy. They also limited access to the children, even from well-meaning extended family members, establishing boundaries that some royals found baffling or even offensive, but that William and Catherine insisted were necessary. Catherine in particular pushed for evidence-based approaches to parenting. She became deeply involved with early childhood development charities, not merely as a patron lending her name and presence, but as someone genuinely interested in the underlying research and findings. She spoke at length with child psychologists about childhood trauma and its long-term effects. She consulted with educators about different learning styles and how to nurture them. She met with mental health experts about building genuine resilience in children as opposed to the false toughness that comes from suppressing emotions. Everything she learned reinforced her instinct that the traditional royal approach, with its emphasis on the stiff upper lip, early separation from parents, and constant public performance, was fundamentally flawed and potentially harmful. William, meanwhile, was doing his own difficult internal work. He began processing his trauma through therapy and honest self-reflection, something that would have been unthinkable for previous generations of royals who viewed any form of therapy as a sign of weakness. He spoke publicly, which was itself groundbreaking, about his mental health struggles following his mother's death. He talked about the years he spent refusing to properly deal with his grief, pushing it down and trying to carry on as though nothing had happened. He discussed the toll that the constant demands of royal duty had taken on his emotional well-being, particularly during the years when he was still trying to process his mother's death while also being expected to smile and perform for the cameras. As he did this painful but necessary work on himself, William became increasingly convinced that George should not have to endure what he had endured. His son would have access to therapy from a young age if he needed it, without any stigma or shame attached. His son would be allowed and encouraged to express his emotions honestly rather than bottle them up. His son would know, from the earliest age possible, that being a whole, healthy person was more important than being a perfect prince. This conviction became a driving force behind the decisions William and Catherine would eventually make. The choice to keep George close to home, to strictly limit his public exposure during childhood, to give him an upbringing that resembled normal life as much as circumstances would allow, all of this came from William and Catherine's shared conviction that the monarchy would actually be stronger, not weaker, with a king who had been raised with consistent love, stability, and genuine emotional support. They rejected the old notion that hardship and deprivation were necessary to forge a proper monarch. Instead, they believed that compassion and security would create a more capable leader. They had done their homework on this question. They studied the European monarchies that had successfully modernized their approaches. They examined how the Dutch, Swedish, and Norwegian royal families had raised their heirs. And they saw that these families had produced well-adjusted future monarchs by prioritizing childhood well-being over rigid tradition. But they also understood that the British monarchy was different in important ways. It was older, more traditional, more embedded in the national identity, and therefore more resistant to change. They knew their choices would face criticism from people who genuinely believed that sacrifice and even suffering were somehow necessary components of creating a strong monarch. They anticipated that senior royals might push back against their decisions. They expected that experienced courtiers would warn them of dire consequences if they abandoned tried and tested methods. They knew the media would question whether they were being too soft, too modern, too willing to throw away wisdom that had accumulated over centuries. And yet, knowing all of this, they chose to move forward with their plans. Because for William and Catherine, this was about more than just Prince George's individual happiness, though that mattered enormously to them. This was about breaking a cycle of generational trauma that had affected the royal family for far too long. They wanted to create a new model for monarchy, one where the individuals wearing the crown were emotionally healthy and well-adjusted people who chose duty out of genuine strength and commitment, rather than out of obligation that had been drilled into them since early childhood. They believed that a person who had experienced real love, genuine security, and authentic childhood would ultimately serve the nation better than someone who had been emotionally hardened through deliberate deprivation and premature responsibility. The palace confirmation of their decision was, in many ways, William and Catherine putting their vision into official writing. It made their approach permanent and formal, ensuring that it could not be easily reversed or undermined by future courtiers or even by other family members who might disagree. They were using their considerable position and influence to protect their son in ways they themselves had never been protected. They were taking the painful lessons from their own experiences and using them to create something better for the next generation. And they were making a significant gamble that a monarchy rooted in genuine human connection and informed by modern understanding of child development would resonate more deeply with the British public than one based on outdated notions of royal exceptionalism and necessary suffering. It was undoubtedly a risk. There was no guarantee their approach would work. But the alternative, raising George in the same manner that William had been raised, with all the emotional distance and premature pressure that entailed, was simply unacceptable to them. They had seen the damage firsthand. They had lived it. And they were absolutely determined that their son would not become another casualty of a system that had always valued the preservation of the institution over the well-being of the individuals within it. To fully appreciate just how revolutionary the palace's confirmation really is, you need to understand exactly what William and Catherine are rejecting. The traditional approach to raising royal heirs is not merely a few decades old or even a century old. It stretches back across generations and was built on assumptions about leadership, duty, and the very nature of monarchy that seem almost cruel when viewed through a modern lens. For most of British royal history, heirs to the throne were not raised by their parents in any meaningful sense that we would recognise today. They were placed in the care of governesses, tutors, and courtiers from infancy. The reasoning behind this practice was straightforward, if harsh. These children belonged to the nation, not just to their families. Their development needed to be overseen by professionals who understood the unique and specific demands of royal life. Emotional attachment to parents was actually seen as potentially problematic. It might make the future monarch too soft, too influenced by personal feelings rather than reasons of state. This was not considered cruel at the time, but rather the responsible approach to raising someone who would one day hold such an important position. King George III, who reigned during the late 1700s, barely knew his own children on a personal level. He saw them occasionally in formal settings, but their day-to-day upbringing was entirely managed by household staff according to rigid schedules and strict protocols. Queen Victoria, despite being a mother to 9 children, maintained a similar emotional distance, particularly with her eldest son, the future King Edward VII. She found him disappointing from an early age, told him so frequently, and ensured that his education was rigorous to the point of being punitive. She hoped that harsh discipline would correct what she perceived as serious flaws in his character. The approach did not work, and Edward grew up with deep resentment toward his mother. This pattern continued well into the 20th century. King George VI, father of Queen Elizabeth II, was a shy and sensitive child who developed a serious stammer. This speech impediment was partly due to the harsh treatment he received from his tutors and the enormous pressure placed on him by his father, King George V. The elder George believed firmly that toughness and strict discipline were essential for royal children. He showed very little warmth or physical affection toward his sons. The younger George, who had unexpectedly become king when his brother abdicated, was left with emotional scars that affected him throughout his entire life and reign. Queen Elizabeth herself, despite being by many accounts a devoted and caring mother, still raised her children according to royal protocols that prioritized duty over emotional closeness. Prince Charles has spoken in various interviews over the years about receiving very little physical affection from his mother during his childhood. When she returned from royal tours that lasted for months, tours during which Charles and his sister Anne did not see their mother at all, she would greet them with a formal handshake rather than a hug or embrace. This was not because she did not love her children. By all accounts, she did. But she had been raised in a system that equated emotional reserve with strength and proper royal behavior. She was simply repeating what had been done to her. Then there was the matter of education, which carried its own set of harsh traditions. For generations, royal boys were sent to boarding schools that were often chosen specifically because of their difficult conditions. The prevailing idea was that deprivation and hardship would build character and prepare these boys for the challenges of leadership. Prince Charles's experience at Gordonstoun in Scotland became particularly well known and widely discussed. He was bullied by other students, physically miserable in the harsh Scottish climate, and profoundly isolated. When he complained to his parents about how unhappy he was essentially told to endure it and stop complaining. His father, Prince Philip, had attended Gordonstoun and thrived there, becoming head boy and excelling at sports. Philip could not understand why Charles struggled so much. The possibility that different children might have different needs and temperaments, and therefore require different educational environments, was not seriously considered or valued. The curriculum designed for royal heirs was also highly specific and quite narrow. They learned constitutional history in great detail, military strategy, multiple foreign languages, and elaborate etiquette. But they received very little education in subjects that might develop emotional intelligence, creativity, or independent critical thinking. The goal was not to produce well-rounded human beings who happened to be royal. The goal was to produce individuals who could fulfill the ceremonial and constitutional functions of monarchy efficiently and without complaint. Whether they were happy or personally fulfilled was considered largely irrelevant. Public duties also began at a remarkably young age by today's standards. Prince Charles attended his first official public engagement when he was only 5 years old. Prince William was doing walkabouts and shaking hands with complete strangers while still in primary school. These children were expected to perform flawlessly, to represent the crown with dignity, to never show signs of frustration, fatigue, or any normal childhood emotion when in public view. The pressure was immense, and for sensitive children like Charles, it was often completely overwhelming and deeply distressing. The underlying philosophy behind all of these practices was that royal heirs needed to be fundamentally different from other children. They needed to understand from the earliest possible age that they were not normal and would never lead normal lives. Childhood was viewed primarily as a time for preparation and training, not for play, exploration, or the kind of carefree development that other children could take for granted. This was not seen as cruel or unusual. It was simply understood as the necessary price of being born into royalty. But this approach had serious consequences that became increasingly difficult to ignore. Multiple generations of royals emerged from these rigid childhoods with significant emotional difficulties. They struggled in their marriages, had complicated and often distant relationships with their own children, and often seemed unable to experience genuine happiness or personal fulfillment. The famous stiff upper lip and strong sense of duty kept the institution functioning and maintained public respect, but it came at a tremendous personal cost to the actual individuals involved. By the late 20th century, these costs were becoming impossible to ignore or dismiss. Princess Diana spoke with unusual openness about the emotional coldness of royal life and how it had contributed significantly to her struggles with mental health, including bulimia and depression. Prince Harry has been even more explicit in recent years, describing in television interviews and in his published memoir how the complete lack of emotional support and the relentless pressure to perform damaged him profoundly. He has spoken about turning to alcohol and drugs to cope, about panic attacks, about feeling completely trapped. Prince William, though considerably more measured and careful in his public comments about his upbringing, has made it absolutely clear through his actions and decisions that he believes the old ways were fundamentally flawed and unnecessarily harmful. The palace's confirmation about Prince George's upbringing represents a direct repudiation of this entire long tradition. William and Catherine are saying, in effect, that the historical approach was wrong, that children, even royal children destined for the throne, need consistent love, emotional stability, and genuine engaged parenting, more than they need early intensive training in duty and protocol. That a happy and well-adjusted child will ultimately become a better and more effective monarch than one who has been emotionally hardened through deliberate deprivation and enforced distance from parents. This decision represents far more than a minor adjustment or a small modernization around the edges. This is a wholesale rejection of centuries of established royal child-rearing philosophy. And critically, it is based on something the monarchy has rarely allowed to significantly influence its decisions in the past: contemporary scientific evidence about what children actually need in order to thrive and develop into healthy adults. William and Catherine are essentially betting that the research is correct. that the child psychologists and development experts and educators know better than centuries of accumulated tradition. They are consciously choosing their son's well-being and mental health over institutional, precedent, and established protocol. The risk they are taking, of course, is that they might be wrong, that the old methods, however harsh and even cruel they may seem by modern standards, actually did produce monarchs who were capable of handling the unique and intense pressures of the role. That by giving George what most people would consider a normal and healthy childhood, they might inadvertently be failing to prepare him adequately for an extraordinarily abnormal life. Critics of the decision make exactly this argument. They suggest that William and Catherine are being naive, that they are putting their own emotional needs and desires ahead of what George will actually require as a future king. They point to history and argue that the system worked, that it produced monarchs who served effectively even if they were personally unhappy. They worry that softness now will lead to weakness later. But William and Catherine have clearly concluded that the greater risk lies in continuing to raise royal heirs the way they have always been raised. They have witnessed the damage firsthand. They have experienced it personally. They have seen family members struggle with depression, addiction, failed marriages, and profound unhappiness. And they are determined that their son will not become another casualty of a system that consistently valued the preservation of the institution over the well-being of the individual people within it. The palace's confirmation makes that determination official, permanent, and very difficult to reverse. The palace announcement landed with extraordinary force in British media and sparked intense public debate. Within hours of the statement's release, every major publication had rushed to publish opinion pieces, and social media platforms were flooded with reactions that ranged from enthusiastic support to dire predictions about the future of the monarchy. The immediate media response split along fairly predictable lines. Progressive outlets like The Guardian praised William and Catherine for prioritising Prince George's mental health and bringing evidence-based parenting practices into an institution that had long resisted such modern approaches. Their coverage emphasised how the decision aligned with contemporary understanding of child development and represented a healthy break from traditions that had caused genuine harm. Meanwhile, more conservative publications expressed considerable concern. The Telegraph ran several pieces questioning whether George would be adequately prepared for the enormous responsibilities of kingship without the traditional rigorous upbringing. One prominent royal historian argued that while compassion toward children was admirable, the monarchy had survived precisely because it demanded more from its heirs than ordinary families demanded from their children. The tabloid newspapers were less interested in nuanced analysis and more focused on generating drama. Headlines screamed about palace rifts and generational conflicts. Anonymous sources were quoted suggesting that King Charles was deeply unhappy with the decision, or that other senior royals felt completely blindsided. The consistent implication was always conflict and division within the family. But beyond the media circus, the actual public response proved more complex. Scientific polling conducted immediately following the announcement showed that approximately 68% of British people supported William and Catherine's decision. Perhaps more tellingly, the support was even stronger among younger respondents, with over 80% of those under 40 approving of the approach. The reasons people gave for their support were revealing. Many cited their own experiences with mental health challenges or their understanding of how important childhood well-being is for long-term success. Parents in particular identified strongly with William and Catherine's desire to protect their child while preparing him for future responsibility. However, the 22% who opposed the decision were not simply traditionalists. Some genuinely worried that George was being set up for failure, that he would reach adulthood unprepared for the unique pressures of monarchy because his childhood had been too normal. Others felt the royal family had a duty to maintain certain standards and that William and Catherine were imposing personal preferences on an institution that belonged to the nation. Royal commentators and historians found themselves divided as well. Robert Lacey, a respected royal biographer, argued that the monarchy had always adapted to survive and that this approach represented necessary modernization. He suggested that raising future monarchs to be emotionally intelligent and genuinely connected to contemporary life would strengthen the institution. Other historians were less enthusiastic. Hugo Vickers expressed reservations about whether George would truly understand the weight of his future role without traditional intensive preparation. He acknowledged the old methods had flaws, but suggested there was value in rigorous education and early public exposure. social media became an intense battleground of opinions. Parents shared their own struggles with balancing protection and preparation, many expressing solidarity with William and Catherine. Mental health advocates celebrated what they saw as major public figures prioritizing emotional well-being. But harsh critics accused the couple of being too soft and too willing to abandon British traditions. For William and Catherine, the response seemed to strengthen their conviction. In a follow-up statement issued through Kensington Palace, they thanked supporters and reiterated that their decision came after careful consideration and extensive consultation with experts. They emphasised they were not rejecting duty or tradition, but seeking a healthier path toward preparing George for his future role. The statement concluded powerfully. We believe that a future king who has been raised with love, stability, and genuine support will serve the nation better than one who has been hardened by unnecessary deprivation.